Thank you for coming today to interview with us, Mr. Ralph Thompson. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Well, yes, like I said, I am retired. I worked for about 32 years. I worked for a company, at that time, it was International Harvester. They made trucks, farm equipment, and they sold the farm division and only make trucks and school buses now. And I spent some 32.8 years with them, and I've been retired for about 21 years.
What neighborhood do you live in?
I live in Westwood neighborhood. I've been living in Westwood from 1971 until today. We played softball. We played baseball, makeshift baseball, because sometimes we didn't have a baseball, so we'd take a broom handle and a tennis ball and make up our game. And we used to play what they call straight base. We had home plate and one base because we didn't have enough people to play a 9-member team. So we made it up and we played with a broom handle or a stick and a tennis ball. Then every now and then we'd find a golf ball somewhere, I don't know where, but we'd find a golf ball. And you'd hit a golf ball, man, it'd travel a mile, but we'd get to hit it one time. We'd lose it, but we'd do that. And we would make up certain games. That's why I said about straight base and playing baseball. And they used to play cork ball. They used to take a cork out of a bottle and play with that. And you're talking about getting action, talking about a curve ball and all that you couldn't control. It's almost like a knuckleball. You didn't know where it was going, but you get a lot of action. And we would play that. And we would make up games to play. And it was something we were kind of acrobatic sometimes. We would take a sack, fill it with grass, tie it in a tree, and we would jump and swing on that sack. And we'd push it out, and we'd get it swinging, and we'd jump on it. And one of the things that we would do as you get a little more confidence was to jump out and catch the sack with your legs without catching the rope with your hands. And luckily we didn't kill ourselves, but we did. And then as we began to come into more organized sports, and then going to the high school that I went to, that's where we got into organized baseball and basketball and things like that. But when you're just in the neighborhood, you'd make up games to play. I came up during the years of segregation, and I remember some of the things that we went through, that we faced, and we overcame. I remember the march, the sanitation march here. I remember going to the speech that Dr. King gave over at the church, the mountaintop speech. I happened to be there in that night to hear that. It was storming outside, strange. After he was assassinated, I remember the tanks. I remember one tank in particular on the corner of 3rd and McLemore when I was on my way home. This was after he was assassinated. I know how I felt. I remember all the burning and things like that. We were denied jobs, just dignity, public dignity, if that's the proper way to put this, and I'll give you my example of that. City transportation, riding a bus, and you wanted to ride the bus downtown or whatever, and the bus is crowded, and you couldn't get on the bus. You hand the motorman, the operator, your fee in the front door, and you go around to the side door and go in the side door. And you couldn't even stand, next to the white people at that time. And I'm reminded of a place out in front of the old Firestone plant. There was an area at a bus stop, and they made a little area with a canopy over it to stand under. And they had 2 signs painted in the concrete, colored in white. You couldn't even stand in the rain together. It was segregated. And you imagine how petty that was, that we worked all day together, and we go out to catch the bus home, and we can't even stand under canopy. You got to stand on one side, and I got to stand on the other side. So if you went out there on Firestone today, near Moorhead and Firestone, and you see a little concrete slab. South Memphis went through a great change. And when I first moved out here, it was mostly whites that lived in this area, and as we moved out here, it began to change, and we don't have, I mean, they moved out, you know, exodus of white residents that lived in. And I saw that change. And I saw neighborhoods like Westwood, I saw like South Memphis, South Parkway, and all of those areas change. I listened to bluegrass, and what you had to understand in the early 40s, and when I was growing up as a child, that's all you could get on the radio. And that was a show on WMC that played blues, African American music as they would call it today. And that was about 15 minutes a day. So I ended up listening to country and western, bluegrass, and then on Sunday afternoon in the early 50s, you could listen to jazz on Sunday afternoon. And then Sundays, you could listen to some religious music. And as time went on and then WDIA came into play, then you'd get a variety of blues and religious music. So I went that route. So I actually grew up on country and western, the Grand Ole Opry, western songs, and I can name you all western people. And I watched the Gene Autry's and the Bob Wills and the Texas Playboys. I go to church. I'm not the person that you would see just thumping the Bible all day, every day. I go to church almost every Sunday. But I think in your religion, not only you talk about it, but I think you got to live it. And I think the way you live your religion is, what do you do in the community? What do you do in and around your neighbors? How do you carry yourself? And I think, to me, in religion, you go, that's more in line with what that religion is all about versus, you know, some big mega church and you're not even known in the church. You're just a number. And I think you ought to look at yourself and say, what am I doing as an individual? Am I a nice guy? Do I respect my neighbors? Do I respect myself? Those are the kind of things I look at it if you're religious. Sanitation strike was one of the bigger things that happened in this community. Dr. King losing his life supporting the sanitation workers, but that was a big thing. On the smaller scale that affected, again, I'm going to the total community versus just Southwest Memphis. People that work with their hands, that worked in manufacturing and those places, when those companies began to leave this neighborhood and this community and this state and this country, then young people didn't have nowhere to go, and they don't have sometime a way to make a decent living, have some benefits, and there's no hope. And I think that's for the whole community. And so when I look at the whole community, I look at what effect those businesses had on Memphis, South Memphis, especially South Memphis, because a lot of African Americans work for the Firestones and DuPonts and the International Harvesters and the Kimberly Clarks and all. They made a decent salary. So those that didn't go to college could go out and make a decent living. T.O. Fuller Park is a 1,100-acre park that was one of the first parks dedicated to a black person in the state of Tennessee. Not the state of Tennessee, east of the Mississippi in the United States. T.O. Fuller Park was, T.O. Fuller was a doctor, he was an educator, he was a preacher. He was a senator in the Carolinas in the 1800s. He came to Memphis. He started a school. He graduated from Shaw University. Family man, I think he married about 3 times. He was pastor at First Baptist Lauderdale when he died. He died about a month after they dedicated the park to him. And this very building and this facility over here was part of Fuller Park at one time, and when they were digging and doing the work here at the park, that's when they discovered the remains and all, and that's how Chucalissa came about. But at one time that was all part of Fuller Park. But we, the adults, we don't do a good enough job in getting any kind of publicity about the park, going out doing like what I'm doing today, sharing with you, my limited knowledge of the park. I think more of us should do this more, if that makes any sense. And getting people aware of what this park is, what it's all about, what the outdoors is all about, being more concerned about the environment. According to the records, T.O. Fuller Park and over here together used to draw somewhere in the neighborhood of 40,000 visitors a year, and I don't think we're there, and I don't know whether we'd ever get there or not, because there's so many more parks in the system now. At one time, we could only, African Americans would only go to Fuller Park, so everybody who wanted to go to a park had to come here. So I think that had something to do with it. Then when this came along, although it was separated, they counted everybody that came down here. So now with the other park and in the system and people can travel more, it takes away. So I think you have to put forth a special effort to draw attention to T.O. Fuller Park and this area and the outdoors. And I think if we start talking more about trying to conserve and watch these parks and use these parks and be more supportive of the park, coming down here, sitting under the trees, relaxing, watching the birds, bring your friends down, just having a relaxing moment. And I think that would help the park and you get more familiar with the outdoors. I think one of the strengths in our community, we got a very strong president of the Westwood Neighborhood Association. And he does a lot of research, and I would like to encourage you guys the same thing. Do a lot of research. He does a lot of research, and he's very familiar with what's going on in and around the neighborhood. One of the weaknesses we have, we don't get a lot of participation of people that live in the neighborhood. And I think you've got to participate in your neighborhood to keep it up. If you want a strong neighborhood, you want to keep your property value up, then you need to have a strong neighborhood. You need to be aware, and you need to participate in your neighborhood. I would change our attitude. I would change my attitude. I'd change people's attitude, how they look at the neighborhood, how they look at politics. I would ask people to pay more attention to the politicians, hold their feet to the fire when they come out and make these promises that what all they're going to do. I'd make those politicians accountable to me and my neighbors. I participate, I volunteer at T.O. Fuller Park, president of the Friends group. Try to keep the park going, try to bring in new ideas, make people aware of what's going on here in the park. I work in the neighborhood, I meet with politicians, I take our grievances as a citizen to the politicians. I try to keep my neighborhood safe, clean, and quiet. I think people ought to maintain the houses, cutting the grass. I moved out here in 1971, and what is that today? 30-some, 40 years or whatever. So I've been here that long. That's a home. Sometimes you can buy and you do an investment where you buy and stay so long and move out. Stay so long and move. I bought to pay for it and live in it, and after I retired, have a place to stay, and that's where I've been for 20 years since I retired.
On behalf of me, Gerard, and Brian, we thank you for taking time out of your schedule to give us more information on our project. We really appreciate it.
I appreciate your invitation, and I hope this has been enlightening to you. And I just challenge you to just go out and do the best you can and make as much as you can out of